We take you here now. Tributes continue to pour in for human rights lawyer George Bizos. He passed away at his home on Wednesday at the age of 92. Many have praised Bizos for his dedication to fight for human rights, with President Cyril Ramaphosa hailing him as one of the architects of our constitution. We get you more reaction now from former President Kgalema Motlanthe. Dada Motlanthe, a very good afternoon to you, and thank you very much for joining us. There's a whole generation of young South Africans who are going to grow up reading about who he was. If we can take this opportunity, perhaps, for you to reflect and characterize who he was or is.
Good afternoon, Duduzile. Good afternoon to your viewers. George Bizos was a renowned human rights lawyer, a fighter for justice, who understood that the fight for justice or the fight against injustice is very consistent. So to George Bizos, it did not matter who the perpetrators were. He would always be on the side of the victim and take up the cudgels on behalf of the victims. He used his skills very, very effectively. He's renowned for having exposed the old apartheid security police who, in many political trials, were presented as experts on the liberation movement. I remember this one Major Statler who was always testifying in political trials as an expert on the liberation movement. And in one of the trials, George Bizos asked him a very simple question, whether, he had any causes or special qualifications for him to be introduced as an expert. And the good Major, confirmed that yes, indeed, he's an expert on the ANC, for instance. And so George Bizos said, "What exactly did you study? I mean, what qualifies you?" And he said, in response, "I read all their publications and the notes, of those we interrogate, having, detained them, and." Yeah, so that's what qualifies me to be an expert. And so George Bizos asked him a follow-up question that does it then mean that each and every member of the ANC is an expert on the ANC? And the good Major was in doubt about that because, he then said, no, he doesn't think so. And George Bizos moved on and asked him other questions. Who were the organizations that attended the Congress of the People in 1955 at Kliptown? And the good Major responded by listing them: the South African Indian Congress, African National Congress, Colored People's Congress, Congress of Democrats, and the Pan-Africanist Congress. And just on that note, George Bizos moved on to the next question and asked him said, the ANC has a flag which has 3 colors. Can you name them in the order of that arrangement? To start from the top or the bottom, it doesn't matter really. And that knocked the lights out of the good Major. And George Bizos then went on to address the judge and said, my lord, this man should never ever be introduced as an expert in any court of law. He's a police witness. That's who he is. So, there are a number of these kinds of accounts. I remember once in 1991, at the height of the violence, the security forces had unleashed violence against communities in and around the Gauteng province, which was known as the PWV region at the time. And so people were being attacked in trains, in the townships, everywhere. So the security police planted one youngster who approached the leaders of the youth league at the time and said he was part of a group of 15 young students kidnapped from a school in the Vaal, and they were taken to a camp, a military camp outside Pretoria, where they receive training, and every evening they are joined by people from the men's hostels to attack communities. And so the youth leaguers were impressed by this account, because he said he had escaped and 14 of his fellow students were still in captive. So the Youth League wanted to hold a press conference, but they didn't have a venue for a press conference, and they ended up coming to the ANC offices. We had offices down in Jeppe Street in the CBD at SMB House, and so they came with this Jeppe and shared the account, their version of what this man was claiming. And I remember we then asked the late Becky Mlangen, he was a lawyer at Chitland Thompson, to basically interrogate this fellow and satisfy himself. If he's satisfied, then we would arrange for a press conference for him to share with the media what was behind this claim.
Sure. Dr. Motlanthe, in the beginning you mentioned that you characterized him as a fighter for justice, and he played a very pivotal role in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. But to date, we still have not seen the prosecution of some of those who took part in the worst atrocities against people in South Africa. Did he ever reflect with you on perhaps what he thought, his disappointments or his hopes in making that a reality?
Well, whenever he was disappointed about these kinds of matters, and whenever he bumped into me, he would stand in front of me and say to me, "What can I say to you?" And then raise his clenched fist and say, "Amandla," and walk right past me like that. That's how he used to raise. I would then get the message that he's got concerns about one matter or the other, and I would then take the trouble to inquire, and he would basically share with me his concerns, whether it related to failures of the ANC or failures of the government. He would definitely share that with me. Yeah.
What is the task facing South Africa as we go forward? A number of heroes from yesterday falling. So what is it that we are faced with as a country going forward?
Well, I think one of the things we should avoid is to burden the departed with the responsibility of solving problems, when in fact we should be thanking them and celebrating them for having done whatever they could within their powers to create, conditions for the thriving of a democratic society. So I'm not one to want to go to the cemetery and start asking for guidance. I think if we failed to learn from this generation of titans for freedom, we shouldn't burden them with the responsibility of our failure to internalize the values, norms, and practices and accountability that they embodied here.
Kgalema Motlanthe, thank you very much for your time this afternoon.